Squire can just present.
All right. Let's see.
Too many cooks. No one knows who to start.
Yeah, I was just checking the participants list. All right, we'll go. I'll kick us off here.
Cool.
Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to MVP Office Hours. My name is Jared Kingston. I'm joined by fellow hosts Dale Ziegler, Squire Kirshner, and Joy Shutters Haberling. Did I say that right?
It's Shutters Helding. You're all right.
Ah, gosh, I tried. You guys want to say hi? Introduce yourselves.
Let's all do it at the same time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Talk over each other.
You go together.
I'm Dale Ziegler, based here in Kansas City, a senior business analyst at Seven Summits, and thank you everybody for joining.
Squire Kirshner. I'm in Baird in Milwaukee, and I'm excited to be here too.
I'm Joy Shutters Helding, and I am calling in from the Chicago area, and I'm excited to talk to everyone today. Look at all those names. I love it.
Awesome. All right. Well, as we do with every MVP Office Hours, we like to kind of kick off here with an overview of events that are upcoming that you should check out there. So, unfortunately, several of these have been postponed in light of the virus, as we'll call it. So as you'll see there, some of those have been postponed. There are some coming up. Austria, I got to figure out. That's unfortunately happening too soon. I totally missed that. That would have been awesome. And others coming up there. I mean, we're just taking this all over the world. So definitely check those out. Obviously, your local community group as well. All right, moving to the next slide. Just as kind of a recap of our rules, or rules of the road, if you will. Rules sounds a bit formal. Really, just again, this is an open channel, so just mute yourself, and we should be good. And then, I see some MVPs on the line here. Just raise your hands there, and we can see who we got. So several of you out there. All right, we got a good smattering of MVPs out there, so you are in good hands today. So let's before we jump in, just a reminder: we have a site out there, mvpofficehours.info. You can get all the information on this office hours, as well as the other ones we host within EMEA and the Portuguese office hours, if you're interested in joining or helping out with any of those. And with that being said, we will kick off the call. And who wants to start us off with the first question?
See Jen's hand raised.
Awesome. Go ahead, Jen.
You are muted though. Jared or Squire, there you go.
Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
I have two questions. My first one was, so I have a flow, just asking about the order of operations. I had to split up something between a process builder and a workflow. So the original one was a workflow that sends out an email notification when an object is created, or a record is created in an object. And I had to use a process builder to populate we have a field in that object that looks up to a user. So I had to use a process builder because it was kind of a workaround. It wasn't a direct relationship, so I had was a child of a child something. Anyway, I used process builder to populate that lookup field. So now when my email notification goes out, I think it goes out before my process builder, because that person on the lookup, I added it to the recipients of the email notification, but they don't get the email.
So this is Brian. Just generally speaking, you should do your best not to mix automation types and depend on one automation to make sure the other works. For this very, very reason, because especially when you're mixing workflow rules and process builders and flows, the order of execution can really mess you up. Because it should go, if I remember correctly, workflow rule field updates happen and then process builder happens. But the record that is being evaluated within your process builder may not be the version that is being fired by your workflow rule. So I'm a big fan of saying, even if you have an existing workflow rule, if you know that, hey, your logic criteria that you're doing within your process is going to end up sending out an email or whatever the case may be, do all the actions in a single automation version. Either do it all in workflow, do it all in process builder. Don't try to mix and match, because you'll drive yourself nuts in the long run.
Okay, so if I move them to a process builder, the order operation would be field update first before the email notification, if I combine them all in the process builder?
Yeah, so if you look on the screen right now, they put up the order of execution. And so the way it will work is it does everything that you see here right down until it gets down to execute workflow rules. That's been highlighted at step 11. And then further down below from there, which is 14, is when your processes would get fired.
Okay, so my workflow that's fired before my process builder.
Right. So the trick that I always find, though, is because you're dealing with field updates in your workflow rule, technically speaking, you can end up with the record that's being evaluated at step 14 having the value prior to your workflow rule field update happening. And then depending upon the settings on that process builder, it may fire the process again because the workflow updated the field. And this is why usually I don't say don't mix things around, because you can have field updates occur either in workflow or in process builder, and the results of that may meet other criteria, but it only gets evaluated in process if you mark the little recursion checkbox on the object. And that can cause other problems down the road, depending on how you're using that object. Are you doing imports, things like that?
Yeah.
Which is why it's usually better to say, if you're going to do it, pick an automation platform, especially for you're dealing with things like your field updates, your high critical stuff, and do it all in there versus trying to say, well, I'm going to do this field up and workflow rule and then rely on that being correct and then having my process catch that update and do the email alert down the road.
Yeah, so if I move them all to process builder, right, my workflow actually just sends out the notification. If I move them all to process builder, my process builder has the field update. Will my field update run first before the email? I thought that you can't also order.
So if it's really important for you to say, I want my email to go out after that field is updated, you should include that in the criteria for your email, because in process builder, if we say, hey, we're going to have a criteria, a process run, and that record would have two different diamond nodes to say it's true. One that does your field update and one that does your email alert. Even if both nodes are being evaluated, when it's that process first gets evaluated, it's with the values that when the record got saved, meaning that when it hit your second node to send the email, it will be evaluated without the field update. The process would have to rerun again after the field update in order to include whatever your update's doing.
I have to check that recursion, right? For it to run again?
Or it would have to run again, which is why if you know that, hey, when this criteria is true, I want a couple things to happen. One being I need it to update the value and I need to have the email alert happen. You're better off doing both within the same criteria and have the field update happen first as the action and then send the email. And that in that circumstance, it should include whatever the change is.
Oh, hold on. Put them in the same node?
If it makes logical sense. I don't know what your use case is and what or your ramifications, so I don't know if it will that makes complete sense or not. But if you told me, hey, I know, and every single time I'm going to be doing this email and the field update, it would make sense to do it in the same node and just have the very first action in that node be your field update.
But so Process Builder follows that order? Which one is first?
When it comes
the
to
action?
actions, it absolutely does, yes.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
Okay. The reason why things kind of get confusing for people, and to be
Mhm.
quite honest, it's confusing to me. I have to sit down sometimes and literally map it out. Is when
Mhm.
you're going through the process, the
Mhm.
record that's being evaluated is identical from the very start. So let's say you have 3 different nodes and they all evaluate the true, and each one does a different field update. The
Mhm.
record they're being evaluated is identical, meaning node 3 is not taking into consideration the field updates that were done in node 1 and node 2.
Okay. Yeah, the nodes I get, right? Because that's where you put your criteria. But when you're defining the action, if
Right.
that order is followed, it's not like in workflow, right? No matter how many times which action you put in, it doesn't follow that order. So you're saying
Yeah.
in Process Builder, that action follows.
In Process
order.
Builder, the action, yeah, it literally goes down the line from whatever the
Okay.
first action is to the last.
Okay.
Now, obviously, that is something I would test and do in Sandbox, but that's been my experience.
Okay. Yeah, because I know in workflow it does not. So, okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
with workflow, you really have no control over what happens.
No. Okay. I will test that out. Thank you. So my second question was, is it possible to set a default opportunity split type per profile or record type?
Set
I have not found an answer to this one.
a
Opposed to the
default opportunity split type.
Mm-hmm.
Would that potentially be somewhere in the opportunity teams realm?
Well, opportunity split is a separate related list that's typically used to be able to say, how should this opportunity dollar value get split across multiple people, typically the people on the opportunity team?
Yeah.
When you say type, are you referring to record type?
So split, you can define multiple split types. When you
Honestly, it's literally been a year since I looked at an opportunity split. Has not been very common.
Would you like to present? Is that something that you put on the screen for us?
I don't have it set up yet.
Okay.
I have one type set up, but I want to create another split type, and this is because it's based on region, right? Each user belongs to a specific region. So if you're in region A, this is your split type. If you're in region B, this is your split type. I wanted to default it. Otherwise, the user would have to select it every time. You can select multiple split types to define which amount, which currency field you're using, what's the split percentage. But
You're referring to the split types, like, is it a revenue or is it an overlay?
yeah,
Okay.
you can create multiple. I think you can create up to 3 or something. I don't know. But you can create multiples. But I wanted to know if it's possible to default based on either the opportunity record type or the profile. And I posted it on community and did get an answer. So
I don't think it's a profile based setting. Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that. I would have to probably go and do the exact same thing you do and putz around and see if I can make it work.
Yeah, I'm just, this is Stuart. I'm just kind of, as Dale knows, I read a lot here. I'm reviewing an article. I'll put it in chat here in a second, called Considerations About Opportunity Splits. New opportunity split records include a default entry for the owner. The owner initially receives 100% of the split amount. That's all it says about defaults. You can have up to 5 types, opportunity split types.
So Jen, your first question was about flow. Is the object structure around opportunity splits something that you could possibly make a flow around to make your own default if a default isn't available out of the box?
I could probably take a stab at it. I was just trying to see if there was something that I could just set up some pegs rather than have to use the flow. So.
When I Googled it, all I found was an article from 3 years ago that then references an idea on the Idea Exchange for default opportunity splits.
Okay.
But if it's all in the realm of data and objects, yeah, you could definitely, you should be able to put something together in Flow, either behind a process builder, behind an action, whatever you would need to invoke it. But that'd be something to play with.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Thanks for your questions. You got any hands up?
We have Stuart E-D-L-E. No, okay. Stu, did you have a question?
The stew.
The Stu.
I have a follow-up question to the last question. Something that Brian Kwong said made me wonder about Process Builder a little bit more. So he said that when a record goes into Process Builder and in one node, a change may happen to that record. If it goes down to the next node, it's not looking at the change to that record. It's still looking at the original status of the record as it went into the Process Builder. Is that what I heard?
You heard that right. It used to be different, and then 2 releases ago, there was a critical update to put it the way that Salesforce wanted it to have happen, which is the record is identical with whenever it gets evaluated in the node. And I believe that has been released since then.
Yeah, I think it was just last time.
Checkbox is for the recursive checkbox. So if there's any change to that record and it evaluates again, it goes back into the Process Builder again.
Yeah, that's something different. So that's recursion.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say we have a process, and we have 6 different nodes in that process. The way it works is when a record gets saved, the state of that record is identical for every node that's reviewing that in that process. And it isn't until the process starts over again, if you have recursion turned on, where the record would be different. So let's say we have a situation where our first node does a field update to set this type to customer. And then further down, we have a node that says, hey, when the type is customer, do something. I save a record and the type is currently prospect. It hits the first node and it does a field up to say customer. It gets down to the next node. When it evaluates, the type is still prospect. It's not customer. You would have to finish the whole process and then have the process start over again with recursion. And then it would say type equals customer for each node.
So I have a couple more questions on this scenario. In the first node, if you can imagine, I have an action that is time-based. I've set one of my actions to be 30 days after this this event occurs to update a field. Can I, before that action occurs, I can obviously check again. I can have a check happen to say, does this record still meet the criteria? But does that, is it still checking the original record, or is it now looking at the record as it is today?
All right, so with scheduled actions, my understanding is the action gets scheduled, and then at the time that the action is supposed to get evaluated, it will recheck to see if it still meets criteria. And so it's not like holding the state of the record like from 3 months ago. It's taking a look at what the value of the current record is. Because at some point is, if the record ever goes outside of that criteria and is being reevaluated, it will not keep the scheduled action scheduled.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever you have anything that's scheduled, basically it's it's a whole different ballgame at that point.
Yeah. I mean, you're becoming Doctor Who here, because you could put an action in a scheduled. You could put an activity in a scheduled action that actually is kind of negates what happens in node 2 and node 3 of your process builder.
Right, except for your scheduled action is going to happen after your first run of your process builder fires. Because it doesn't happen immediately. When we're talking about evaluating the nodes, that's a single transaction. The moment you do something that's scheduled, anything that happens after that's scheduled is considered a different transaction.
Yeah, okay. Okay. I watched the trilogy of Back to the Future last weekend, so this has got my mind racing.
Yeah, you do need about 1.11 gigawatts in order to make this work.
Oh, geez.
There's quite a few documents, if you go through your critical updates in your org, that cover the evaluate criteria, which kind of summarizes everything the two of you were talking about for anyone who was trying to keep up.
Thank you.
Who else?
Like Marty has
Marty's
her hand
on.
raised.
Yeah.
Hi, this is Marty. So this is a opinion / best practice question. I'm a consultant and I have a client who has a multi-stage process. When people are working on an opportunity, it goes from person to person who has different responsibilities. And when I first started thinking about the best way to kind of move it along, I originally thought of process builder and creating a task as it moves to the next stage, which would work. And then I started thinking about approvals, and I'm not an approval expert. So before I go down that path, that's my question. Opinions as to best practice to do something like that.
Do you have any reason, as you go from stage to stage or resource to resource, do you have any reason to need to lock the opportunity or wait for an explicit approval?
No.
If you don't, I would say steer clear of approvals.
That's what I thought.
Agreed.
Yeah.
They are a rabbit hole.
Oh my God, yeah.
And they're also one of the worst automation platforms we have available to us right now, unless you explicitly need to do a approval where you don't want anything to change, why it's in the approval process.
Now, what I have done in the past is when you do have opportunities changing hands, you have, if you look at it on a matrix, you have, or I mean, swim lanes, you have vertical and horizontal swim lanes in this one.
Yep.
Is, I know some people might differ with me, but multiple record types, which then gives you the, record type's a little bit of an easier point to leverage if you're doing validation rules or if you're triggering any other automation. Obviously, then from the UI layer, you can differentiate your pages and what information shows by profile if the users are broken out by profiles. That's record typing's been the biggest tool in my toolkit when it comes to many hands along the way.
And yes, we have multiple record types for the reason of sometimes they're fairly complex and sometimes they're real simple. So in the simple ones, though, that's why at this moment we have 2 different record types.
Well, what I'm saying is like I record type by stage. Like I do a 1-to-1 of record type per stage, not just like a you know, new business versus renewal. I'm saying as you go from stage to stage.
You change the record.
Yeah.
Yeah, I concur, Dale. That's what we've done with ours as well. We have there's 10 record types because there's a pre and a post engagement point in time, and then the record types change your layout, change your related list, change your access. Does all kinds of cool stuff as it changes. The user doesn't know any different, but it all drives from the record type underneath.
Bingo. And well, what it also does is as the opportunity evolves, if you're starting a brand new opportunity, your sales rep may only know 4 or 5 pieces of information. So only give them 4 or 5 fields to get it started. Right. And then as you evolve from stage to stage, the probability goes up and you need more information, can capture information, need to lock information and make it read only, at least on the UI. Record typing and profiles put together allow you to control those requirements through the UI instead of, that's typically where validation rules happen. And my opinion, not that you asked for it on validation rules, is I hate them. I try to avoid them as much as possible for a number of reasons. But introducing record types gives you actually a lot of flexibility when you have many hands in the pot.
Yeah.
I have a question on that one. Sorry, this is Jen. Sorry, I didn't mean to hide, but I.
No, you're good. No. That's what this is for. It's open floor.
Why wouldn't you use Lightning? Why wouldn't
you
use Lightning and hide show fields and highlight certain fields on your path?
Lightning Flow?
No, Lightning Experience. Why wouldn't you?
Because there still has to be a trigger point or a leverageable point like a record type to switch out what gets you from one layout to another.
Because you're still only just changing the
you can highlight
visibility of the component, right?
Stage.
But you can hide show fields based on certain criteria, right?
Not yet.
That's
Oh,
still not
hide
GA.
components.
For a stage, well, for specific fields to that. I mean, that's what you were going for, right? Is with the path, have the highlighted fields on the path bar, and then have those per stage that you're wanting to highlight.
I think there's probably like 3 different really good ideas all floating around each other based on what I was hearing. So we have the what do they call it? The form builder that we saw at Dreamforce that got bumped out, which would allow you to do field by field. Then we have the idea of a record type driving different entire page layout experience changes, which is I think what Dale and I were talking about. And then you could go to the component filtering, which is I think what Brian referenced. Is that everything? Is there more?
Yes. Then there's the actual path component, single component, and using the path, and then just displaying fields for a stage within the path component.
They're real quiet there. I hope no one's just listening to me type.
The clicking of your keyboard is so soothing.
I'm sorry, and I didn't realize that it was doing that.
You do not apologize again. It is so soothing.
Hey, Marty, did we answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, great.
If Squire can, at some point in time, educate us on his solution more, do you have links or videos or something that is going to have simple people like me understand how to do that? That'd be great.
I don't, but I should. It's actually a business implementation that I'd have to tear apart, but I can try to paint a picture if it's worth the time. If it's not, then I will take an action item to do just what you asked.
I have a feeling it would be helpful for me, but I'm not able to form the words because I think I need something to look at to respond to first before I can say, yes, that's exactly what I needed.
Sure. Well, I tell you what, I'll give you like the 30-second version, and if it's not even close, then we'll take it offline or I'll come up with a way to verbalize it. So we have a very long opportunity methodology. So we're not talking minutes or days, we're talking years start to finish. And so when an opportunity comes in the door, we do call it an opportunity, and it only has about 7 or 8 milestones, which we consider our stages. And every time you pick a new stage, we actually underneath the covers have a record type assigned to that stage. And so as you change it, there's actually a field update changing the record type, which then changes the page layout assignment so that from the user's perspective, the whole page is evolving. So when you start, you've got like 3 required fields and a pick list. And then as you move along, more and more of the page grows out, more related lists start showing up. And then there's actually an engagement point where it goes from a good idea to a deal. That stage actually then changes the record type like a 6th time and restarts the stage, the path and the stages, and it has an entirely new layout. What that gives us is the ability to have one record that shows all the data through the life cycle of the project. But from the user's experience, they just keep seeing what's important on the page in different layouts. Did that help?
How do you force them to start at phase 1?
So we have a global action that creates the record and doesn't allow you to do anything more than stage 1. And then in the path, we have required fields for each additional stage that basically say, open up that helper window and say, these 5 things have to be filled in before you can save the next layer. So there's a little bit of validation in there, but it also, it was a necessary evil once we get to flow builder components, like I think was it Marty or Jen that was referencing earlier, we'll probably convert to that.
This is way easier to do in Lightning.
Yeah, it's all Lightning, absolutely.
Okay. I love it.
I'd be happy to go in more detail offline if it didn't help.
Yeah, we can talk.
Okay, cool. Looking forward to it.
You're awesome.
Do you love it or do you love it?
Well, I love it. I just can't use it. But I mean, I love it. I love you. I love this whole call. Thank you very much.
It sounds like you love it. And if you want to put in like 84-point font, Dale says avoid validation rules, I will take ownership of that. We all say avoid approval process. It's like
considering the infection rate, no one's really avoiding it right now. So maybe Just
Good point.
remove that.
I would say a lot of us are, well, we're being forced to avoid it physically. Media-wise, you can't get away from it.
Excuse me.
That's not funny. So not funny.
That was not, that was serious.
Everyone go wash your hands.
Quick read buttons.
I did cover my mouth, so you're okay. And I faced away from the microphone.
Everybody throw away your computers and get new internet providers because Brian just coughed on the call.
Great, I got microphone germ.
Yeah, I've had a cough since halfway through February. Being a Chinese guy in the Midwest with a cough has been very entertaining.
Oh man. All
Have you
right. Do
been
we have
anywhere
any
up here
other
in Seattle?
Salesforce issues?
Marty has her hand raised. Marty, save us again.
Okay, thank you. So I agree with the no validation rules for a different scenario, mostly because I hate doing them. But this, I think, needs a validation rule, and I am struggling with the syntax. So if the contact type is a pick list of prospect, customer, blah, blah, blah. And what they want the validation to be is if the contact type is not one of the types, then email must be filled in.
So can I
Please.
go ahead, Brian?
Yep.
I'm not going to rail on validation rules. The thing you
I
always
will.
think about is at the end of the day, when the formula is done evaluating, true means there's an error. So if you want to say, hey, if there is, I have this list of pick list values, and if it's not one of those lists, it's something else, then throw the error. There's two ways to write it. The first one is you take all the other values that are not in the list that they told you and say, check to see if the pick list is one of those. If it is, and the email is blank, throw an error. Okay.
So so the syntax on that, so I say, is pick val paren-
I'm going to make your life so much easier.
Yeah.
Okay. But pick list values,
Yep.
the text function, text is your friend. Is pick val is the most annoying function in the world.
Yeah.
So
True story.
if you just type text parentheses the name of your pick list value, it will literally return just what the actual text is. So you can do text pick list value equals and then in quotation marks customer, prospect, or whatever. So that makes things a little bit simpler to read because you can do something along the lines of if text type equals customer, or if text type equals prospect, or if text type equals whatever, then true, then whenever it's one of those values, it would throw true, or the error would throw off. You don't even need to have the if statement in there because
it's really just going to evaluate true or false, right?
Yeah.
When Brian's done, you're going to want to keep that if statement, but Brian, keep going because I got something.
The other thing that I like to avoid are the and as well as the or functions.
Yep.
Just because from a statement of reading, when we talk, we don't say or 1, 2, 3 column. We say 1 or 2 or 3. And so the way I would order mine is about logical 1, like text pick list equals comma. And then if it's an and, I do a double ampersand. Then whatever the additional logicals is. If it's an or, it's a double, I believe it's called pipe, whatever that straight line is. And that makes things simpler to kind of organize. So when you're reading your validation rule, it reads more like how we talk.
Yep.
Right. And so in your circumstance, what you need to do is you need to take a look at what are all the values you have in your pick list.
Yep.
Against the values that they say, hey, these values are okay to have a blank email, and decide which one has more. I would probably go for the logic of if you have 5 values where it's okay to have a blank list, then I would have it and say, let's check to see that if it's not value 1 and it's not value 2 and it's not value 3 and it's not value 4. Because that way, if you add more values to pick lists in the future, you don't have to worry about updating your validation rule. So it would be like, let's say customer is an okay value to have a blank email address for.
Okay.
I would do text pick list field not equal to, which is a less than greater than in
Yep.
the validation rule parlance. So less than greater than quotation mark customer, and text pick list value less than greater than whatever your next value pick list value is, and so forth.
Okay, so let's say customer's the only one that it could be blank.
Then you would have text pick list field not equal to customer and is blank parentheses email.
Got it.
Right. So two logicals. You can't, if the pick list field is not customer and the email is blank, it's an error.
If I can add one thing to what you're saying, Brian, because it was one of the best tips I ever got. When you write a validation rule on a piece of paper, scratch pad, whatever, you should say, I want to see a validation rule happen when, and write it out as a sentence, as though you're explaining it to a child. And then if you do that and take each of those sections and then take each piece and write the formulas, it ends up building itself. You don't have to think so like in the double negative over time. Once you get it to work, then you can like refactor it to be more sensible, but it really helps you get this going forward with the whole double negative mentality.
So I'm gonna take both of what Brian and Squire said and maybe blow your mind. And I presented on this at Dreamforce a couple of years ago. Don't even load up your validation rule. So going to the point that validation rule is actually in the negative tone. When you introduce not, you have the double negative, but it's not fully a double negative. And and or are not opposites of each other. Not and is not the same as or, et cetera, et cetera. When you take all those, validation rules are confusing because they are not in the natural tone that we speak.
Correct.
Typically, we want a system to do something. We don't ever really, we're not trained to necessarily think about what not to do. So what I do is I create a formula checkbox field that allows me to speak in the positive. So if you take what an if statement, how the if syntax is actually constructed, best practice is if the exception to my rule, then do something, else do the norm. I'll pause there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so if you start with that and you set up your formula field, and I mean, I know it's excessive technical debt, but depending on how complex your rule is, it may actually help. But if you do a formula checkbox field that says, if my exception, then true, else false, then your validation rule is go look at that formula checkbox field. If it's true or false, then raise the flag. Because what the formula field allows you to do is think in the natural positive tone of, I want something to happen when, or do this when X criteria is met. Stop there, go to your validation rule, and then say, if that checkbox isn't lit up, then okay, I have a problem. Or if it isn't lit up, then I have a problem. But it keeps you from having to write a complex formula field in a complex formula in a negative tone. Yep. To then have to break apart and diagnose, et cetera.
If you go the formula route, Dale, do you create a validation rule one-to-one for each formula, or do you create one validation rule to rule them all across all the formulas?
It depends on your use case. Depends on how disparate your business requirements are. I mean, you could absolutely load them all up into a single validation rule and maybe clumps of validation rules. But what my goal with that is to keep you from having to write in the negative tone, which can be frustrating beyond belief when you're trying to diagnose, add to whatever. If you can get into the natural thought of what's my positive, and then know that your validation rule is by default in the negative tone, you've already done all the positive in the positive space, but the negative do the negative.
The benefit that you can look at the record as you're debugging and see what the formula is.
Exactly.
In. Yeah. The reason I asked the question about having one, if you do that route, I would still create one validation rule so you have the capability to turn them off if you need to, versus if you have one for everything, there's no way to turn off just one part of the logic.
Right.
So the one thing about that, Dale, is part of the validation rule, though, is to highlight something on the page for the user to say, here's where your problem is.
Mhm.
If you put the validation rule on a hidden formula, how does the user know where the error is?
But the
No, but you can choose where you put the validation rule. You don't have to put the validation rule on the page, on the field that's causing the problem. You could say your validation rule could be looking for an issue with the name field and put it on a date field or at the top of the screen.
Okay.
Now where, going back to Brian's question of, is it many VRs or is it one rule mall, whatever, again, that goes back to your actual use case that you're trying to meet, and you'll just have to kind of pick and play it as you go. But you don't have to. That's another thing that a lot of admins will fall into is, well, I'm validating against this custom field, therefore it must be on that custom field. No, you can put it wherever you want on the page. You can put it on any field that's even not on a page, and the default behavior is if that field isn't on the page layout, it goes to the top, I believe. Somebody might have to check me on that, but all that to say, you don't have to put it on the field that the VR is referencing, because what if you have multiple fields in a VR? You can't put it on all the fields. So anyway, that has been a huge help for me from a mindset, what am I actually trying to accomplish standpoint, is let formula fields take care of the positive and then let the negative validation rule find the negative of the positive instead of trying to cram everything into the negative.
Like it.
Yep, thank you.
Anybody else? Some pretty good conversations. I don't want to lose the last couple minutes unless we're tapped out. Anybody? All right. I guess I guess I'll just ask the group. Has anybody heard about any other meetings that are being postponed or rescheduled that we want to keep track of from the side?
If you haven't heard, Banff Dreamin' has moved to November instead of next week.
Really? They moved it to the same month as Dreamforce?
It is the week after Dreamforce on November 20th.
Okay. So, hey, Squire, can you go to the first slide on the deck?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
So that Trailhead now owns the link to all of the community events. When I checked earlier this morning, they hadn't updated Banff and Southeast Dreamin' yet, but if community events are on your list for the year, it's a good comprehensive site to go to. And I'm going to guess that, as obviously things are incredibly fluid, they're going to be on top of trying to keep it as updated as possible. I don't know what their SLA is on it. But.
And Banff only made that announcement just earlier this week. So.
Right.
That was weird. It was there a second ago.
You're not logged in?
It's a public page.
Yeah, I thought it was too.
That's what they say.
They? Who's they? Do you trust they?
I don't know. I don't know who they are. That's what's frightening.
All right. Anybody else?
I've been discovering a lot of pages that I thought were just always there that are hidden under logins these days.
Mm.
New computer will do that to you.
Oh, yeah.
As a quick side note for anyone attending Bear, the hotel has have no additional cost. November, the choose.
Silence. All right. I guess with the deafening sound of nothing, maybe we give her back 5 minutes. Does that seem like a good play?
Sounds good.
All right.
For me.
All right. Well, then I think, as always, if any of these questions you answer on your own, feel free. In fact, and we encourage you to post a little follow-up on MVP Office Hours so we can hear more about your success. Thanks everyone for joining, new faces and old, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.